Howard stared at the glowing blue hologram of Tony's perfected super soldier serum, his fingers drumming against the table. The formula spun slowly, its complexity almost hypnotic. He had been examining it for 30 minutes now, going over every detail that it was elegant, refined, and, if Tony was to be believed, flawless. Howard exhaled, rubbing his chin. You're really telling me this thing works? No side effects? No hidden risks? No turning into a raging psychopath? Tony smirked, leaning back in his chair. Dad, come on. It's me. Howard gave him a flat look. That's exactly why I'm asking. Tony chuckled, swirling his orange juice. Alright, fair. But yeah, I tested it. Ran simulations, analyzed genetic compatibility, and accounted for metabolic fluctuations. No melting bones or insane rage mode like the Hydra knockoffs. Howard crossed his arms. And aging? Tony pointed at the hologram. Slows it down. Not immortality, but you'd stay in your prime for a long time. Howard leaned back, silent. Tony's smirk lingered, but his eyes were sharp, studying him. So, what do you say, Pops? You want in? Howard blinked. Excuse me? Tony rested his elbows on the table, voice casual but laced with something deeper. You heard me. I could give this to Peggy, yeah. But what about you? Howard frowned. Tony, I'm 72. So is she, Tony shot back. And with this? You wouldn't be. Howard scoffed. Oh, so what? You're offering to turn me into Captain America 2.0? Tony grinned. More like Howard Stark Prime. Howard shook his head. You're insane. Tony shrugged. Maybe. But think about it, Dad. How much more could you accomplish with another 50? Hell, another 100 or more years in your prime? Howard's fingers twitched slightly. Tony pressed on. You built Stark Industries. You've shaped the world. And now? You're stuck in boardrooms, wasting time on bureaucrats instead of creating. Howard stayed silent. Tony leaned in. I'll be direct. You're running out of time. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And you hate it. Howard's jaw tightened. Tony tilted his head. So why not fix it? Howard let out a slow breath. It's not that simple. Tony raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? Just say yes, and I'll take care of the rest. Howard looked away, staring at the hologram. The idea was tempting. No. More than tempting. It was terrifying. For decades, he had worked with some of the brightest minds in the world. He had seen what science could do, what he could do. But even with all his accomplishments, he had never managed to beat time, age, decay. Mortality. It was the one enemy he had never been able to outthink, but Tony had cracked the code. Howard clenched his jaw. You think I'm afraid of dying? Tony's smirk faded slightly. His voice softened. No. I think you're afraid of stopping. Howard inhaled sharply. Look, I know what you're thinking. It's unnatural. It's cheating. Maybe it feels like you'd be going against everything you've accepted about life. Tony tilted his head. But what if I told you, you don't have to do it alone? Howard frowned. What are you getting at? Tony's smirk returned, but his eyes were softer. If you say yes, I'll give it to Mom too. Howard's breath stalled. She doesn't have to grow old either, Tony continued. She doesn't have to watch you get weaker or worse, lose you first. He leaned back, spreading his arms. Think about it. The two of you, back in your prime. No more bad knees, no more back pain. No more aging gracefully nonsense. Just you and Mom, living. Howard swallowed hard. Maria, for years, he had felt guilty. Too caught up in work, in war, in industry. He had promised her they would grow old together. But he gave too much time to his dreams instead of his family, and now Tony was offering him a different kind of future. A future where Maria wouldn't have to suffer through old age. Where they could have more time. Where they could truly live instead of waiting for the inevitable. Howard exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. Jesus, Tony smirked. I know. I'm a genius. Howard shot him a look, but there was no real irritation behind it. Instead, something Tony rarely saw in his father, uncertainty. Howard Stark always had an answer. Always had a plan. But now? Now, he was faced with something he couldn't control, his own future. He let out a long breath. And you're sure about this? No risks? No complications? Tony nodded. I wouldn't be offering it if there were. Howard ran a hand down his face. If I do this, Maria does too. Tony's grin widened. Obviously. Howard sighed. All right. I'll talk to your mother. Tony's smirk turned triumphant. So that's a yes. Howard shot him a pointed look. It's a we'll see. Tony chuckled. Close enough. Howard leaned back, still absorbing the insanity of what his son had just proposed. Then, as if the conversation hadn't been crazy enough, Tony casually dropped, all right, so what's the deal with Peggy? Howard let out a long sigh, pushing his half-finished plate aside. I'll try to convince her, but it won't be easy. Tony raised an eyebrow. Why not? Howard shook his head. She's under heavy security. Ever since she agreed to be part of the Serum trial, S.H.I.E.L.D. has her under 24/7 surveillance. Nobody gets in or out without them knowing. She's already being treated like the agency's most valuable asset. Tony sighed. Of course she is. S.H.I.E.L.D. probably sees her as the perfect test subject, someone with a strong moral compass, a loyal soldier, and a symbol they can parade around if this works. Howard nodded. Exactly. And considering the fact that someone inside S.H.I.E.L.D. is trying to sabotage this whole thing, I doubt they'll just let me waltz in and take her away for a friendly chat. Tony tapped his fingers against the table, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Good thing I planned for this. Howard frowned. You planned for this? Tony smirked, reaching into his jacket pocket. Of course I did. What kind of son would I be if I didn't? He pulled out a small vial filled with a deep red liquid and set it on the table. The substance inside shimmered faintly under the overhead lights. Howard's eyes narrowed. And that is? Tony leaned back. A contingency plan. He then placed a small, round recording device next to the vial. All you have to do, Tony said casually, is get this to Peggy. Howard frowned. And how am I supposed to do that? Walk in and hand it to her with a, hey, Peg, drink this mysterious red liquid my son made? Tony chuckled. No, see, that's the beauty of it. She'll figure it out. You don't need to convince her of anything. Just deliver the package, and she'll do the rest. And don't you try to listen to the player. It's a disposable player. The message inside will play only once. As for what's in there, which I'm pretty sure you are dying to know, well, you'll know soon enough. Howard studied the vial carefully. Okay. I'll wait for that surprise. But this is... Don't tell me. Tony smirked. Yup. That, dear father, is the injectable version of my perfected super soldier serum. No machines. No Vita-rays. No fancy setups. Just one shot, and boom, instant upgrade. Although it takes a few minutes to gain super strength and healing, plus another 24 hours for the de-aging process. HAA. Okay. I am not even surprised anymore. I'll even believe it if you say you tested it on yourself. Howard gave up being surprised anymore. But he noticed that Tony was smiling at his words. "You tested it, didn't you?" Tony's grin widened. Howard groaned, rubbing his temples. "Jesus, Tony. Relax, Dad. No side effects, remember?" Howard shook his head. "I swear, one of these days, you're going to give me a heart attack." Tony shrugged. "Not if you take the serum." Evening, Howard stood near the waiting helicopter, his fingers brushing against the small vial in his pocket. Tony stood across from him, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable behind his signature sunglasses. There was a weight in the air. Not tension. Not unease, something else, something neither of them had been good at dealing with. After a moment, Tony reached into his jacket and pulled out two small items. The first was a custom-built wristwatch, green and stylish, but clearly more than just an ordinary timepiece. Yet it was so light. The second was a delicate pendant, its center holding a shimmering blue crystal that pulsed faintly under the light. Howard frowned, eyeing them. "What's this?" Tony smirked. "Insurance." Howard raised an eyebrow. "Against what?" Tony shrugged. "Anything." Howard sighed, taking the watch and strapping it onto his wrist. "And what does this do, exactly?" "No fun if I tell you now." Howard took the pendant carefully, studying the faint glow. "And if your mom asks what it is?" Tony smirked. "Tell her it's a late anniversary gift. I'm pretty sure you missed it and she was grumbling over the phone. Or you can say that it makes her look 10 years younger. Whatever works." Howard snorted, slipping the pendant into his pocket. "You really think of everything, don't you?" Tony's expression softened slightly. "When it comes to keeping you two safe?" "Yeah." For a long moment, Howard didn't say anything. Then, to Tony's complete surprise, Howard stepped forward and pulled him into a firm hug. Tony stiffened. For a split second, he didn't react and his brain barely processed what was happening. Howard Stark was hugging him. It was rare, almost non-existent. After a moment, Tony hesitantly raised his arms and returned the hug. Howard's voice was quiet but strong. "I'm proud of you, Tony." Tony swallowed, feeling something tighten in his chest. For a man who always had something to say, he suddenly found himself speechless. Howard pulled back slightly, resting a firm hand on Tony's shoulder. "You've done something incredible here. More than I ever imagined." Tony tried to play it off with a smirk. "Yeah, well. Gotta keep the old man on his toes." Howard chuckled, shaking his head. "You've done more than that." He exhaled, glancing toward the helicopter. "I'll set up the Stark convention soon. We'll make sure your work gets the recognition it deserves." "Guess that means I have to start practicing my speeches," Tony said. Howard grinned. "For once in your life, yeah." The helicopter pilot gave Howard a signal. It was time to leave. Howard sighed, adjusting his watch one last time. "Take care of yourself, Tony." Tony gave him a two-fingered salute. "You too, Pops." His eyes went toward his right for a flicker moment. Something rustled over the grass. Howard turned and stepped onto the helicopter. The engines roared to life, the blades slicing through the air. The aircraft lifted off. Howard glanced down, watching as Tony stood there, hands in his pockets, watching him go. He gave a slight nod. For the first time in a long time, Howard Stark felt something he hadn't in years, not just pride, not just admiration, hope. His son wasn't just building the future, that he was the future, and for once, Howard Stark wasn't leading the charge, that he was following, and he was okay with that. The ride back had been tense. Not because of the near-death experience, nor because of the insane revelations Tony had dropped on him. No, what unsettled Howard the most was the feeling that something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. By the time he landed at S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, he had already reviewed every detail of the attack a dozen times in his head. Too coordinated, too clean. Whoever was behind it wasn't some third-rate mercenary group. Not to mention that unknown cyborg girl who saved him, and that scared him more than he cared to admit. As he exited the helicopter, his old friend was already waiting for him. Nick Fury stood near the edge of the landing pad, arms crossed, his long coat shifting slightly in the wind. His one good eye was locked onto Howard, and for once, the usual sharp humor in his expression was absent. Howard sighed, straightening his tie as he approached. "You look like hell, Fury." Fury didn't even blink. "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." Howard smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, you're not wrong. It's been a long damn night." Fury exhaled, his voice dropping slightly. "Walk with me." They made their way down the corridors of S.H.I.E.L.D. HQ, passing by rows of agents, analysts, and security personnel. Howard noticed the way some of them looked at him, like they already knew about the attack. Fury didn't speak until they reached his private office. The moment the doors shut, the security locks engaged with a soft hiss. Howard turned, folding his arms. "All right, Fury. Tell me you have some good news." Fury didn't sit. Instead, he moved toward the reinforced window, looking down at the S.H.I.E.L.D. operations floor below. "You're not gonna like what I have to say." Howard's jaw tightened. "That bad?" Fury finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Last night, just as you were attacked, I lost contact with 2 members of the World Security Council." Howard's fingers twitched. "Who?" "Yen and Rockwell," Fury said, his voice grim. "No distress signals. No warnings. Just radio silence." Howard frowned. "And you're just now telling me this?" Fury gave him a look. "I didn't have confirmation until this morning." He tapped a few keys on his desk, and a holographic screen appeared, displaying 2 files, one for Councilman Yen, the other for Councilman Rockwell. Fury gestured toward the files. Both of them were key figures in global security oversight. Yen was pushing for tighter international regulations on enhanced individuals. Rockwell was overseeing defense technology contracts. Neither of them the type to just disappear without a trace. Howard narrowed his eyes. "And let me guess, this morning, they were suddenly replaced?" Fury nodded, his voice sharp. "Yeah. 2 new council members. No official statements, no explanations. Just swapped out like spare parts." Howard exhaled through his nose. "So worst case?" Fury's expression darkened. "Worst case, they're dead, and whoever replaced them is working for someone we don't see yet." Howard muttered a curse under his breath. "Jesus." Fury walked over to his desk, leaning on it slightly. "It's not just them, Howard. Something is happening at a level we don't have eyes on yet." "Your attack? Their disappearance? Too much of a coincidence." Howard's mind raced. "So, what do we do?" Fury studied him for a long moment. "We move carefully. If there's a hidden enemy inside S.H.I.E.L.D. or higher up in the council, we can't just go barging in." Howard exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "All right. You do your digging, I'll do mine." Fury nodded. "Already on it." Howard turned to leave but hesitated for a second. "And Peggy?" Fury raised an eyebrow. "What about her?" Howard kept his face neutral. "I need to see her." Fury's expression didn't change, but Howard caught the way his shoulders stiffened ever so slightly. "She's under heavy security. You know that." Howard scoffed. "Come on, Fury. You think I'm gonna do something reckless?" Fury's face remained unreadable. "That's exactly what I think." Howard smirked. "Just let me talk to her." Fury was silent for a moment. Then, he sighed. "Fine. But if this is about the Serum trial, I can't promise she'll listen." Howard gave him a half-smile. "Oh, she'll listen." Fury's eye narrowed slightly, but he didn't press further. "She's in the lower wing. You've got 10 minutes. Howard nodded and headed out. That he didn't have 10 minutes, that he had 1. Because if he was right about what was happening inside S.H.I.E.L.D., then Peggy Carter was in more danger than she knew, and he wasn't about to let her go down without a fight. Shield medical wing, secure quarters. The security was tight, too tight. Howard had been inside Shield facilities enough times to know how their protocols worked. But this? This was overkill, armed guards at every entrance. Biometric locks. Surveillance drones. They weren't just protecting Peggy, they were keeping her trapped. Howard walked up to the main security checkpoint, giving the stationed officer his best businessman smile. Howard Stark. Here to see Agent Carter. The guard hesitated, scanning his ID. One moment, sir. As the system processed his credentials, Howard felt the faintest itch at the back of his neck. Something was wrong. Then, the doors unlocked, the guard nodded. You're clear. Howard stepped inside, keeping his posture relaxed, his hands in his pockets. Peggy's room wasn't a hospital room. It was a containment unit, reinforced walls. No windows. No unsecured access points. Howard's stomach twisted. The moment he stepped inside, Peggy turned toward him from where she sat on the edge of the bed. Even at her age, she was still sharp. Her eyes locked onto him immediately, reading him like an open book. Howard, she said, her voice calm but firm. What the hell is going on? Howard shut the door behind him, keeping his tone casual. That's what I was about to ask you. Peggy's eyes flicked toward the security camera in the corner. Howard followed her gaze, and then he smiled. He put his hand in the pocket and pressed a little button. It'll override the current footage into a little loop. Well, he has the highest level of clearance like Fury, so over the years, he replaced most of the technology related to security and weapons with Stark Industries tech. A little loop like that was a child's play to him. Peggy raised an eyebrow. Impressive as usual. She noticed the camera's green light turn blue. He did this same thing back when S.H.I.E.L.D. was getting rid of the Hydra agents. Howard smirked. You gotta have some cards in case of emergency. She tilted her head slightly. You're not just here for a visit, are you? Howard took a step closer, lowering his voice. No. I'm here to save your life. Save me? I'm 72, Howard. And I know exactly what's going on in here. But still. Peggy's expression didn't change. Go on. Howard reached into his pocket and pulled out the vial and the record player. Peggy's gaze sharpened instantly. Is that what I think it is? Howard nodded. It's the real thing. No Hydra tampering. No side effects. This is the perfected version. He placed it on the bed beside her. Peggy was silent for a long moment, then, she exhaled, rubbing her temples. And I guess, you won't be telling me how you got this? Howard's voice softened. They're setting you up, Peg. Someone inside S.H.I.E.L.D. wants you dead. If you take their version of the serum, it'll kill you. Or worse. They are planning to use this situation to take down Fury and replace him for some reason. And I won't let an old friend die, just like that. You wanted to fight. He pointed at the vial. This is your chance. Howard expected resistance. He expected questions, skepticism, and maybe even a flat-out refusal. What he didn't expect, Peggy Carter taking one long look at the vial, and nodding. All right, she said simply. How do we do this? Howard blinked. Wait, just like that? Peggy tilted her head, amused. Oh, come now, Howard. You wouldn't risk your neck to smuggle this in unless you were absolutely sure. And if you're absolutely sure, then I trust you. Howard exhaled, shaking his head with a half-smile. You always were a pain in the ass, Carter. She smirked. Yeah, what can I say? It's one of my charms. Howard chuckled before getting serious. He tapped the vial lightly. All right, listen. Normally, the process involves V-arrays, controlled exposure, monitoring. Howard, Peggy interrupted. I don't have time for a science lecture. How does this work? Howard sighed, rubbing his temple. Fine, fine. This version? No machines, no external activation. You inject it, it circulates through your system, and in about 24 hours, you'll be good as new. Strength, endurance, healing, all of it. Peggy raised an eyebrow. And the aging? Howard smirked. You'll feel like you're in your early 20s or 30s again. The full de-aging process takes a day, but your body will be back to peak condition within an hour of injection. After that, everything settles in naturally. Peggy studied the vial for a moment before nodding. All right, then. Let's get on with it. Howard's eyes widened. Wait, you mean right now? Peggy gave him a look. Howard, do you honestly think I have the luxury of waiting? If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, then I'm already on borrowed time. If the serum works, then I'll have a fighting chance. Howard hesitated. You do realize the transformation isn't exactly comfortable, right? Peggy gave him that look. Oh, Howard. I was a woman in the military when they barely let women serve. You think I don't know discomfort? Howard sighed, but he couldn't help the smirk that tugged at his lips. All right, all right. You win. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sterilized injection kit. Carefully, he loaded the vial into the syringe and tapped it twice to remove any air bubbles. Peggy rolled up her sleeve without hesitation. Howard hesitated, his fingers hovering over the plunger. You sure? Peggy's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. Do it. Howard exhaled. All right. Here goes nothing. He pressed the needle into her arm and injected the serum. Peggy didn't flinch, the vial emptied. Howard pulled the needle out and pressed a small bandage over the injection site. And now, we wait. Thanks for watching. Please share your loved and subscribe for latest videos.